My guest today is Sheldon Dearr. Sheldon is the technical lead at Octopus Network, a multi-chain interoperable crypto network and Web3 incubator designed to facilitate a new wave of web innovation. Sounds very exciting, very ambitious. Welcome to the show, Sheldon.
Hey Andy, thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure, Sheldon. To begin with, I would love it if you could please introduce yourself. Love to hear just a little bit of a background on yourself, who you are, what you've been doing. I do see that you're a security engineer. Love to hear a bit about your, I guess, your career path leading up to Octopus.
Sure, so I'll give you the ultra condensed version. I'm that kid who's been paying attention to politics since I was about 8, and simultaneously I built my first computer with a little bit of help when I was about 6. So I've been kind of journeying down those paths along with electronic music and some other things for quite a while. And in 2012, I started working in enterprise IT, and it was a reminder to me about the 2009 white paper that I had read. And I remember reading the Bitcoin white paper and thinking, wow, this is great. There's no way this is going to work out. And in 2013, I was asked to root out Monero and Bitcoin miners from a corporate environment. And I fell in love all over again. And I just had to mine a little bit with my PC right as the sort of era was transitioning to, required ASICs for profitable mining. And I was kind of like toe in the space for a while, starting then. Then the ICO boom hit, and all of a sudden, hundreds of people want help and guidance and explanations for things, and I found myself useful. So I started doing sort of consulting, research. Some people call this kind of like speculative action gem hunting. So I started doing a whole bunch of these things, and that kept me busy well after the ICO boom died. I was interested in, the technologic development more than the sort of capital benefits of being in crypto, and eventually just, continuing to operate in the space. That led me to an interesting project showing up in my feed from, I guess it was July 2020. And it was Octopus Network. So I thought it was a really interesting concept. I said, I haven't seen someone do this before. It's refreshing to see somebody actually try to innovate in the space and, build something that hasn't been done before. This is cool. And then a month or two later, I was talking to my peer about it, and he said, hey, we could use your talents. Would you like to join? And I said, absolutely. So it's been a heck of a ride since then, but I really do enjoy it. I am very much in it for the tech. I'm not much of a trader, but I'm a pretty big technologist just because of my background. But that IT security experience that I kind of neglected a little bit is mostly incident response, resource management, risk management, and general networking. So that's everything from helping a firewall get set up in a data center to responding to a breach to helping a company clear tech debt. So pretty diverse experience.
Yeah, I think it says perhaps on your LinkedIn, Sheldon, that you were casually referred to as the king of major incidents during your time at HP. And, you said a couple of things that I just want to pick up on really quickly, just because it's interesting to me. And look, we'll talk all things Octopus. But you said you've done some electronic music production. I used to be an electronic DJ myself, so I can relate. And also, you talked about being that weird kid that was interested in politics from a young age. And again, I think I got this perhaps from your LinkedIn, but I think the first thing you say is, as a security engineer, I consider it my responsibility to be aware of industry and geopolitical events. So, look, feel free to jump into electronic music. But what do you mean by this responsibility of being aware of geopolitical events? I guess that's it relates to threat vectors, but please explain.
So there's different things that you can sort of posture into that, little acronyms like advanced threat actor or persistent threat actor. There's a lot of different things you can throw in, but the logic on putting that in my bio is very much that I do the sort of big picture chaos engineering, what can go wrong grade security analysis. So that means if we are standing up a firewall in a country that maybe isn't the United States, then maybe there's more to consider than just, oh, this is a familiar data center. Maybe there's different things in that area to be aware of. For instance, if there's guerrilla activity that results in a power line being cut, can that have an impact on my services? Maybe. So there's a lot of different aspects that go into, distributed networks and, decentralization, as people like to talk about it. But the, sort of being aware of what's physically around the computer hardware that you care about, it's a relatively, base element of network engineering that you go through in that sort of traditional education. They like to educate how Michael Jackson's death was one of the most important events ever because it lit up the internet like nothing else ever has before and possibly will again, but obviously that's going to change. So there's components of physical existence in a geological location that means that the politics of that region should be considered. And it also means that you should sort of identify, okay, end to end, this node that I'm hosting in, let's say Brazil, if I need an interconnect to Russia, where does that interconnect come from? Does it come from trans-Pacific lines? So I have to go the other way across the Atlantic? How does that work? So asking the kinds of questions like how does the internet work? That's how you get from 0 to 1 on those kinds of strategies. And it just means that you have to pay attention to the big human picture and not just what the tech itself is doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that, Sheldon. And so you've obviously been in tech from a very young age and been, I guess, a security engineer. You've been a computer guy. So was it really from someone who has literally grown up on the internet and with distributed computing networks? How long, you talked a little bit about your, I guess, first dabblings with Bitcoin and Monero, but did you kind of get the promise and potential of distributed blockchain networks immediately?
Oh, sure. I mean, in 2009, when I read the concept of, okay, this is a distributed ledger, I started immediately imagining metaphors and how things would go. And I thought it was a great concept, but I also thought that the sort of powers that be would disallow it, or that there would be, technology to filter it off of modern internets, that ISPs would say, hey, you're not allowed to do this sort of thing on our network. And that still happens today in a small way. But ultimately, my network engineering knowledge at that time was crude enough that I was missing a gap on exactly what that would look like. Today, I know exactly what sort of targeting evasive protocols looks like as an ISP, as a carrier hotel, as a data center operator. I know what it looks like to mitigate malicious mining. But back then, I wasn't familiar, and I assumed that, okay, there's no way that this network protocol will be allowed over a corporate infrastructure back and forth between people's homes for the sake of unsigned code that is evasive. Like, just, in my mind, that was like, there's no way this is going to be allowed to function. But that's why I was so surprised in 2013 and fell totally back in love again, because I went, wow, this is actually a thing. It wasn't just this Silk Road crap that I heard my friends asking me about, which I pretty much declined to touch. But the greater promise was very much that the compute power, or rather the horsepower of a computer, is worth something because of what it can do, not so much the value it presents to a consumer. So I started kind of economically dabbling along that, and that just put me in a really great position to help out in the ICO days, because I could say, okay, what is the computational cost roughly of what you're doing? What's the sort of benefit for the user? And what costs are you going to need to take in and be able to schedule as part of your economy so you can scale up? So it was pretty surreptitious and lucky that I bumped into it in a corporate environment where I had to use sort of legacy firewall tools to mitigate that stuff. But ultimately, I was already doing server hardening, host hardening, small device improvements. And by hardening, I just mean basically turning things off that are not essential without crushing sort of dependent services that your device actually needs. That just means that you're less likely to get a buffer overflow. You're less likely to get some type of, what's the word, recursive attack, reflex attack, different things that would overwhelm your device's resources. I figured that's the least I can do to stabilize my security. So starting from there, it was really easy to transition into, okay, my computer is going to work as hard as it can. How can I make this make sense? So sorry if I got a little off there, but it's it's exciting for me.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating for me as well, Sheldon. And so, look, don't worry, we will get to Octopus. But, how would you describe I guess the current state of play then in 2022 in terms of, because I'm sure you still are very aware of what is going on in terms of, I guess, people, things, everything from, kind of, I guess, like what I would call nation state bot armies. I'm sure that's a slightly clumsy way of characterizing things. Other vectors like, North Korea are particularly notorious for crypto asset hacking activity, a slightly clumsy way of characterizing it again. And, you talked about this surreptitious Monero mining. So I remember that being a thing back in 2018. Is all this stuff still happening? I imagine it's just a constant game of cat and mouse between I don't know, black hats and white hats and everything else in between, right?
Well, that is roughly the security industry in a nutshell. It's just an arms race to something more interesting, more novel, more useful, more streamlined. But for the most part, I would say these things are not nearly as common. It's heuristically very, very easy to say, okay, I recognize this computer went from 0% average, just idle CPU utilization to, sweating like crazy all day, every day. you know, Things like mining are much, much easier with today's security tools to identify and mitigate. But on the larger stage of sort of global compliance, nation states, digital assets, because CBDCs play a role in that discussion, of course. I think what we're looking at is the dawn of a new era where you have a sort of, let's say, a not a 190 way Mexican standoff, but at least an 8 to 15 way standoff where each central bank is sort of accountable to each other in that colluding and saying, oh, well, I run 10% of Bitcoin. Would you, someone who runs 10% of Bitcoin, like to collude with me and try to modify some transactions? Well, that puts their trust at risk. That means that if they get caught, then that central bank is going to have problems with their CBDC. They're going to have problems with their Bitcoin management. They're going to have problems with their regular fiat economies. So this is why I describe Bitcoin as the sort of membrane to a more decentralized world. It's not a membrane to decentralization. That's a common misconception that will arrive at this point someday that will say is decentralized. I don't think that's reasonable. I think Bitcoin is this gateway where on the other side you have digital assets that trade against it. And on the sort of closer side, you have fiat assets, you have traditional assets, you have legacy finance. So Bitcoin opened a door for things like Octopus Network and much more interesting digital economies to exist. But that doesn't mean that it's going to go away. It means that its healthy growth is effectively requiring the co-option of nation state actors, of corporate businesses, basically everyone who controls the internet right now. If they get into Bitcoin as they seem to be doing, then that incentivizes them all to keep each other fair, which is a significant step forward compared to fractional lending.
Yeah, so I mean, this is the dream of Bitcoiners, I suppose, to see a real world nation state adoption and perhaps central banks beginning to acquire it as a kind of reserve asset and probably moving into mining as well. So you're thinking that this path is effectively predetermined. Is that's kind of what you're saying if I'm reading between the lines, Sheldon?
Roughly, yes. There's a power dynamic between global powers today that control just normal currencies, some of them that they're trying to become CBDCs. I believe that that's what's going to happen is that it'll be much easier to say, hey, we trust this code that's been up and running for 10 years instead of we trust one nation, whether that's China, the US, Russia, Germany, whoever, it could be South Africa. There's no one country that should necessarily control the reserve asset. That's the breaking of the pattern of global empires from hundreds of years ago that doesn't really make sense in a converged world. When it takes 2 weeks to move goods between two sides of the Atlantic or the Pacific, okay, there's some reasonable sympathy for that. But when anyone can exchange data so quickly, there's no reason to tie the money system to gold, to old things, to technologies that aren't really considered viable anymore. And that includes systems that interlink central banks. So that's the Libor and SOFR system as well.
Yeah, and so look, you and I can talk about this, and we can imagine this happening, and you're particularly well inclined to understand it simply because of your technical background, Sheldon, and you understand how computer networks work. But certainly politicians, even central bankers, they probably don't have as sophisticated an understanding, and in some ways they're kind of biased against these kinds of discussions. So if that's the case, what kind of time frame do you put on this in terms of, I guess, the game theory or the domino effect, however you want to describe it, kind of starting to play out? Because it does kind of, networks are exponential, aren't they? But they've still got to hit that tipping point, right?
Agree. You can look at some previous trends from what it takes to sort of transition from empire to empire. I think a 10 to 20 year window for that transition is pretty reasonable, but when that transition begins is a fair question because it doesn't necessarily begin when Bitcoin is born or when the first fork happens or anything like that. I think it should begin with the first significant inflow of people. So that's just before 2015, or sorry, just before 2016. That's like, just barely before the ICO craze. I think that yields roughly 2035 as a hard deadline for Bitcoin to be integrated culturally, to be integrated into global finance. There will still be some back and forth, but this idea that the West, i.e., the U.S., controls all facets of the global economy through their leverage on COP25, through the petrodollar, through all these different things. I don't see those power dynamics being able to be maintained based on how the U.S. behaves and how other countries behave. So that's my sort of hard date is 2035 for a significant turning point. I've been calling somewhere between 2024 and 2025 for a few years now. So that's my greater impression that corporations, significant investors, nation states, they'll want to be early to some degree because that's the sort of power problem that's recognized right now where fiat gateways are these like compliance choke points. They're the only place that governments and corporations can really make a move. So I think that different power dynamic where there is, me holding my own private key that sovereignly controls my own wallet. That's not something that can be taken away from me, for instance. That's going to take a little bit more time culturally to make sense for most people. But at a institutional level, I don't see us going without a significant maturation, for a maximum of 4 years. That's absolute hard limit on that turning point, 2026.
Absolutely fascinating, Sheldon. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Man, it's been very, very interesting, I guess, to talk, kind of the wider geopolitics with you. But let's switch gears slightly then, and let's cover off what you guys are building with Octopus Network. And look, the best way to do that, Sheldon, to start with, certainly is, do you want to give us, look, I imagine your high-level summary will be reasonably detailed, so please feel free to do that. But what's the I guess we'll do the origin story and then segue into the kind of the high level vision for what Octopus Network is.
Sure. So Octopus Network is born out of the research organization CDOT. That's roughly made up of our founders, including the CEO, Louis Liu, and chief architect, Julian Sun. Also, Mike Tang, who's very instrumental in bringing community together for different, folks who contributed to that research group. But that research group was tasked with some work because their understanding of light clients is very proficient. So that means they have a very good experience level making these types of solutions that are effectively teaching one blockchain how to speak to another one without devising the need for a third party. So just really quickly on the side, there's roughly three types of bridges. There's the liquidity-oriented bridge where you as a middleman sort of have $5 already on another blockchain. I give you $5, therefore you can afford to give me $5 on another blockchain. There's the validator model or the sort of reasonable intermediary model, which is that there's some sort of distributed structure in between the two chains and you trust that structure to help you get from A to B. And then there's the light client model, which is roughly that one chain directly communicates with another, even if it has something like an interpolator or a relayer, that is not necessarily a third party. That's not a permissioned entity. That's not someone who has control over what's really going on. They're just infrastructure. So our team focuses a lot on light client solutions. And that means that we have a sort of pre-existing motivation to connect multiple chains. Now, there's lots of organizations that can say, hey, we've got experience and we're linking all the best blockchains together. Come bridge with us. This means that these organizations are putting themselves as a gateway, as a centralized party between these distributed networks. And we think that's kind of a backwards trust model. So the logic began to formulate shortly after a grant was given to CDOT by the Interchain Foundation. So that's the institution above the Cosmos ecosystem. And they were asking that the IBC protocol, the inter-blockchain communication protocol, be sort of taught to substrate software. So that means the software platform that runs the Polkadot ecosystem should get this sort of education, if you will. It should get this means of communicating with Cosmos SDK chains as long as they're using IBC. So that was a pretty significant portion of it, but also there is a very overt need to support the market for Substrate, because Substrate is a really excellent software platform. But by the same token, Polkadot and Kusama are the main platforms for that, or the main ecosystems for that software platform right now. They only accept top level projects. Kusama is a bleeding edge technology platform. They are great concepts, but they don't leave room for the little guy. So that was roughly where the concept of Octopus Network came from. The day after Gavin and Lewis having a conversation about what now is parathreads was when Lewis was, pretty firmly decided, okay, we need to solve this market problem. We need to use our skills to make this make sense. And so the journey kind of came into focus. And the next step in that journey, if I'm not mistaken, was finding an appropriate home, an appropriate infrastructure to build this concept. And Near Protocol was selected for a handful of reasons, the chief one being its ability to scale. So with the consensus model called Doomslug on Near Protocol, you have relatively lightweight consensus models. You have relatively sympathetic node behaviors. When I say sympathetic, that means if somebody doesn't participate in consensus, someone doesn't sort of handle a transaction correctly, things just move on. There's not what's called a chain halt where the blockchain has to stop. There's not a significant amount of errors. Transactions, for the most part, aren't going to go through if they can't go through. So because of Near's focus on user experience, scalability, and private key management, which is highly unusual, it became obvious that Near Protocol was a great place to sort of rebuild a new substrate host platform. And so work began. Near became the strategic investor in the project and injected some money in a relatively early round. I believe we were actually only open for seed at the time, and they came in and said, "Hey, we're your strategic investor. We appreciate that you believe in our platform. So let's coordinate. Let's team up on this." And it went off from there. It took a series of months for everything else to sort of organize and for more of the vision to be formed. But the product was in development that whole time. So effectively, where most products say, "Oh, okay, we're working on something," and then it takes them 6 months to a year to produce a product, Octopus Network wasn't out swinging trying to tell people what the product was until well after the product was already underway. And I'm very proud that we launched our mainnet on October 8th last year. It's World Octopus Day. And that was very surreptitiously timed with the market. That was not a mistake. I shouldn't say surreptitious, but that wasn't a sort of happenstance. That was on purpose. And that was because we saw how many not parachain substrate projects might not be in a good position to get this giant venture capital relationship going, to treat their test nets like mainnets and have a functioning economy based on that. And so the need to venture out and communicate with Substrate project was born, and we started building our Appchain pipeline. So that means the relationships with Appchains like DeBio, Myriad, and a few others, they were formed relatively early on because they saw what we were doing and said, "Hey, this makes a lot more sense to me than trying to run on testnet for 2 years and then get a parachain slot." So the model that we're built around is not exclusively for Polkadot. There's no reason why people can't stay in our ecosystem forever, but we're not a clone. We're not a fork of Polkadot. We are a different economic model designed to be significantly more forgiving. I would say 100x cheaper than Dot is today, but that isn't going to last forever. And the logic that we have there is that we expect it will be roughly 10x cheaper when the OCT asset is more matured, i.e. demand is higher, and there's more liquidity moving around because right now a lot of the tokens are in vested lockups. So that means they're gradually being released to investors, teammates, different parties through Ethereum contracts. And as that goes on, there'll be a sort of economic pressure to both speculate for OCT holders and to stay dedicated to projects that they believe in. So instead of having people stake DOT to earn DOT, which is effectively what the relay chain is on Polkadot, all staking of OCT is a benefit for the app chains themselves. So those are the ecosystem members at Octopus Network. That's part of our economic model of leased proof of stake. And that's just the rough plan, is that August 2024, those vested unlocks will all complete. And that means that we'll have our sort of set economic status for the time being. We do have a commitment to sort of give over our pseudo and our abilities to a DAO structure. We might not give over 100% at any given time, but the core logic is that Octopus Network has to be a community-run project for the trust sort of anchors in it to make sense. Therefore, there's no reason for us to sit as kings of Octopus Network. Our whole purpose here is to build something great and then be participants and reap the benefits that way.
Fantastic, Sheldon. Very nicely explained. That was excellent. You spoke about Octopus building on the Near protocol, and you also talked about Appchains. So understand Near protocol. Let's just understand a little bit more about what you mean when you talk about an app chain or application specific blockchain, I think. So talk us through what you mean by app chains, and love you to kind of weave in some of the different use cases as you go.
Absolutely. So you called it dead on. Application-specific blockchains are app chains. We'll take a little bit of credit for coining that phrase, but AVAX and the new Binance Smart Chain solution have started to use it as well. We're not looking to camp on it. I've already made requests to different organizations who are centralized to say, hey, can you update your glossary with this so people can know what's going on? So roughly said, it is an application-specific blockchain, meaning that we do not launch layer ones. We help people launch chains that are specifically tailored to their concepts, to their economy, to their target audience effectively. So what does that mean for use cases? It doesn't have a direct correlation with use cases except for the economy itself. So a virtual machine environment that you might spin up in a data center, the whole reason that you're bringing up that virtual machine environment is because you can tear it down whenever you want. You can say, okay, let me start over from the golden image. I'm going to totally replace what I've been doing. I'm just going to start back at zero. This is one of the nice things about working with layer ones like Ethereum and Near protocol, because you effectively can deploy things, use them, and then move on whenever you like. There's no sort of physical cost to consider for that. When you run your own application-specific blockchain, you're kind of in the opposite footing. That means that you have to have economic planning that says, okay, my concept is not just going to be viable for this amount of time, it's going to be viable, and here's the economic planning that shows that based on these tokenomics, these numbers, the way that the token economy is designed. So I believe our audit metric is 3 years, that they should be able to function for 3 years based on their validator allocations. And that means that instead of paying a Ethereum gas market for compute costs, you would pay a group of server operators directly for running your infrastructure instead of some nameless, faceless person who's trying to mine whatever layer one and get rich, even if it's not proof of work, it could easily be proof of stake. That still means that you don't really have a relationship with that person who's running your network, and you're operating inside relatively limited functionality. It doesn't mean that functionality is a bad limit, but it means you didn't get to choose it. So that leaves a really, really green field for use cases. I can run you through a few, but the main one to consider is economies that aren't necessarily regenerative, but are generative to their participants, meaning that anyone who is an active participant should be putting in value and also taking some away from the chain. If they're only coming there to sort of purchase a good and then leave, that's a non-circular activity. Startup guys will tell you that's not enough of an interaction. And of course, just tweeting about it isn't sufficient anymore. So there has to be a sort of two-way value vehicle for people who participate in the project. And that means that users anyone who touches governance, and validators, the people who run the servers themselves, they all have to have a economic draw to be using the platform. And that's usually some form of innovation that you're not going to find somewhere else. So the most accurate thing I can say about use cases for app chains is that they need to be moderately unique, or they're pretty much doomed to a short life cycle. A non-unique DeFi concept can be fun, it can be well marketed, it can have nice NFTs, it can have interesting gimmicks. But as a infrastructure, that sort of thing has a really hard time lasting because people who run those servers know that so much of your value is based on social value, and you need more utility to make that ecosystem really work.
Yeah, and well, okay. And speaking of utility, let's just briefly cover off the Octopus native token. So what are the utilities there?
So the most important thing to know first is that OCT is our governance token, and simultaneously, it is a token on Near Protocol's chain. A lot of people misunderstand and expect us to have our own relay chain. They expect us to have separate infrastructure. It's not entirely accurate. So first thing to know is that your OCT tokens are held in your Near Protocol wallet, and they have a really, really nice UX and web integration. So that means when you go to our page, mainnet.oct.network, as long as you have Oct already in your wallet, the integration is automatic. There's no plugin you need to have. There's no extra step you need to take. You have to authorize the contract through the web browser to communicate with your wallet, and that's it. So what does that enable when you allow that connectivity with that private key, or sorry, the generation of that private key? It means that you're now able to vote on app chains, you're able to delegate or stake to app chains, or you're able to run your own validator. There will be some other voting functions that we're considering in the future, but those are the main three right now that are the sort of value prop that you get to control who joins the infrastructure, who is voted down if their concept doesn't match the community's values, and of course, the ability to get a payout. So, like I was saying earlier, when you delegate to an app chain, you're putting down your OCT as sort of security collateral, saying that you trust them enough to vest your funds in their validator, and that means that they're going to give you a fair payout based on their operations on that app chain. So, whatever token they're running the network of, you'll get a payout of that token and not of OCT.
All right, makes sense, Sheldon. And what about then? So, for anyone that is listening to this and they're thinking, "Well, this sounds very intriguing. I want to perhaps become an app chain in the Octopus network." And how can they go about that? And what is the Octopus Accelerator program?
So I'll work backwards to your question. The
Sure.
Accelerator program is really designed to help app chains realize their vision, to sort of help with pain points, to resolve anything that might be like a lacking skill set on the team. So the core of the Accelerator is that we cannot accept equity. That's a liability for us. It is free. We don't have any mechanism to bill for it. And there is a $50,000 prize at the end. It's called the Star Prize or the Star Grant. It is a effective trust building exercise for us. We want to show the crypto community at large that these projects that sit with us for about 3 months are able to get some benefit from us, are able to sort of make progress, to sort of have free consulting with us. I help admin the Discord, so the one-on-one contact is very much available 24/7, and that just means that we, on our mission to not be a profit-oriented entity, and to build up the crypto space, not by being a central bridging party, it means that we need to show that our model of helping people is really what we do and not just what we say. So that's really our model with the Accelerator, is to help folks get going, and that means even if they're not building on our ecosystem, we'll still welcome them in, but we certainly prefer to be helping folks who are building with Substrate or even with Near Protocol. So
Yeah. Fantastic. And okay, well, let's finish off this part of the podcast then, Sheldon, before we go to the break. And then I'm actually really excited to do the very famous Crypto Conversation hot take round with you, because you're a very thoughtful fella. So I'll be fascinated to see what you have to say. But before we do that, I'd love to just kind of zoom out a little bit, and I suppose just kind of get your general thoughts on Web3, if we can call it that, just in general, how you think about Web3, where we are, where we're going, possible pain points, problems, potential solutions, all that good stuff.
Sure. So let me work backwards from the target because I think that's one of the most sort of misunderstood components of this discussion. So I think that there is a pretty significant push to say that Web3 means that you as a user control your data. I think that's not enough. I think that's not an accurate description. I think that that's sort of an intention, and it could also be a sort of poison narrative from privacy conversations that have been happening for more than 10 years. So when Facebook gives you a button that says that you can control your data on their platform, that's not Web3, not even close. Now, if I had a private key that gives me the power to control what Facebook's systematic infrastructure does to profile me, that's more Web3, but that takes away a significant amount of profit schema for Facebook because suddenly they don't have this big dominance of the data that I'm producing, which is basically their value prop is that I'm a user on their platform. They can know who I am and advertise to me efficiently. So this is true for most platforms on the internet today, because even if you're not there for that purpose, you're there to receive some trackers, get some cookies, give up some data that helps you be identified for later so that another party who buys that data set can know that you're a good target for couches or whatever you're shopping for. So this for-profit model is something that we haven't completely disconnected away from in trying to talk about Web3. That's how I describe it as read, write, execute, instead of just read, write. And by execute, I mean that I, as a user, actually have control of the platform in some sense. And that doesn't mean control that can be revoked by a administrator. That means control that I have the sovereign ability to screw up myself. So the ability to be your own bank, let's say, right? This extends very much in a Web3 where I want to be my own data service provider. I want to be my own CDN. I want to be my own ADN. I want to make sure that when I have a interaction with a platform that has valuable information for me, that they aren't making money off of that and not sharing it with me. So these are roughly just mature Web 2, you can almost call them Web 2.5 concepts, but the way that that last bit works, that private key, that bit of governance, the platform that isn't necessarily run by a giant for-profit company, that's the last part that we're not framing very well yet. So I'm pretty focused on that as what Web3 means. It means that I have the sovereign ability to control the rules that affect my data when I operate on an internet platform. A little wordy, but it means that I, have sovereign control of what happens to me. I don't have this sort of like gifted control by a, generous overlord, if you will. So I think the main problem, as I've been alluding to, is effectively the profit motive. But at the same time, I don't expect profit motives to disappear. I expect them to get more aggressive. So that's part of the logic and reasoning that I hope brings more users to Web3. It's really the same reason why Facebook is finally losing users, why Snapchat is kind of dead, why Instagram isn't the bastion of hope that it used to be, and TikTok is kind of standing alone as this hot thing in the moment because of the way it's just programmed and designed to touch on people's dopamine and sort of target what people want to see very quickly, almost like Vine. So I think that these giant platforms that are concentrating a lot of attention on themselves, they're not going to necessarily get out of the way for Web3. There's not a real reason for them to compromise with Web3 until they have a significant threat to their business. And that doesn't mean that we go all torch and pitchforks. It means that we silently and quietly protest by using platforms that we like better, where we actually get to have a say, where our data isn't just somebody else's profit, where our being there is valuable to us inherently, even if that means a small upfront cost.
Yeah, and look, fascinating thoughts, and I guess pertinent to this discussion, Sheldon, is I'm sure you probably saw that I think last week, Meta were talking about how they plan to monetize their version of Horizon Worlds, or the early metaverse, and I think they on Twitter I've seen people talking about Meta is proposing to take a 47.5% cut on every transaction. And these are, I guess, they're kind of, they're not even really non-fungible tokens. They're kind of, I guess, in-game meta tokens. But it's just, yeah. So I guess that is the the problem is these big centralized entities, they come with an inbuilt profit motive. There's no getting away from that. But you're right, that's why Facebook is declining, Instagram is declining. What about Twitter? I'd be fascinated to get your thoughts on where you see Twitter, and particularly how you think about Elon's motives to try and take it over, if in fact you think about it and have an opinion on it, Sheldon.
So I try to avoid a little bit of what Elon does on Twitter because a lot of it is more sort of like misdirection and splash in the pond than it is actually swimming. But I think that what Twitter has been doing for a while is trying to set themselves aside as a different kind of platform, as a platform that is supposedly less interested in regulating certain voices, or is more interested in being feature ad in a way that's productive for people, or being just more public in general, in the sense of, Facebook profiles, they're more permissioned, but at the same time, you can still, lock your tweets and only allow certain people to see them. I think that Twitter's been on this journey for a little while to be that, but simultaneously, the longer they exist outside what is considered the norm that, politicians barely understand as is, the more they end up just barely conforming. So I think that's part of what Elon's logic might have been to say, hey, I'd like to take up a, board seat level interest in the company. And it didn't result in any direct action except for Vanguard taking the largest share in Facebook or Meta. So sorry, in Twitter. But the logic that I see unfolding around Twitter is mostly that A, they're trying to separate themselves, but B, especially now that cat's out of the bag, Jack Dorsey has basically acknowledged that Web 1 was sufficiently more free. I don't know that they have a direct path to do that. I was a little bit surprised when I saw their NFT integration launch. I've been saying for a while now that I'm not getting a hexagon until I can use my Substrapunk, which is a CryptoPunk, i.e. it's a series of hex values for little numbered dots instead of an image hosted on some cloud server somewhere. I'm not interested in getting an NFT up on Twitter until that NFT can be on a blockchain that isn't, say, in the top 3 most popular in the world. So that's roughly my position, but I am rather hopeful, and I will readily admit that I just started buying Twitter Blue because although Facebook has been my sort of foot traffic platform of choice, it was just easy to use for me for automated reasons and some other things. I'm not interested with the sort of ball and chain that comes with that anymore. It's not worth mitigating anymore. The communities that I used to administer are not necessarily gone, but they're not the bastion of research that they once were when people were more curious between the ICO phase and 2020. So I think that's really the play, is that Twitter understands that they have this unique positioning, and even though they're losing it a little bit, they don't have to lose it completely. That might have motivated Elon's decision, but it certainly motivates Vanguard's decision to notice, okay, Twitter is one of the most powerful websites in the world. Having 10% of it, I think it's actually 10.5 by shares, is actually a pretty powerful thing for global finance, to say that there is leverage, to say that there is a power dynamic there. I'm not saying that it's smoke-filled rooms necessarily, but there is an obligation to shareholders for value. So that means that Twitter will be sort of committed to this profit motive the same way almost every other Web 2 business is, but hopefully they'll be able to retain some of their culture for the last few years and be able to do that differently.
Yeah, I think that's quite an astute analysis again, Sheldon. I guess the only the paradox, if you like, there is, of course, that due to Twitter's slightly different way of operating, and perhaps their recognition of the unique role that they play as the public square, if you like, of any important event of note anywhere in the world, almost, they don't have the same paths to easy monetization that some of these other platforms do have. And as a result, I think the Twitter share price has really done almost nothing over the last decade. So it's fine if for these massive banks or investment firms to take a position in Twitter because they can see I guess, the global strategic importance. But harder to see how they get an outsized return. They're probably better off buying Bitcoin. That's another discussion. It's time to go for a break, Sheldon. But don't worry, we are going to be right back to put Sheldon through the very famous crypto conversation hot take round.
Excellent.
All right, we are back, and I'm with Sheldon Dearr. Sheldon is the technical lead at Octopus Network, a multi-chain interoperable crypto network and Web3 incubator. And look, listeners, if you've been listening, I'm sure you've very much enjoyed listening to Sheldon, as have I. But we are now approaching what I like to call, Sheldon, the very famous crypto conversation hot take round, in which I'm just going to put a quick series of questions to you. There's no right or wrong way to answer these questions. Just want your true and honest opinions. The first question, Sheldon, is where do you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-chain opportunist spectrum?
I am very much an Internet of Blockchains kind of guy. I was very hard for Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum for a short period, but that was when I believed that developers at those three projects were very focused on bridging towards each other. So I'm extremely motivated to make sure that the logic of how Bitcoin operates or how Ethereum operates or how any chain operates isn't the one thing that we hang our futures on. So I see a lot of ways this is coming together, but I'll give you the short form answer, which is certainly that I believe in the Internet of Blockchains model, where everyone is kind of gradually going together. And the talk that I gave at ETH Miami the other day will be posted relatively soon. And it explains a little bit more about that relative to Ethereum.
All right, and we'll certainly be interested to hear what you said there. And that reminds me, I did see you, Sheldon, at the recent Bitcoin conference in Miami. So what were you doing there?
Well, I am relatively proud that Miami is my hometown. So born and raised here for 20 years, left to Austin for about 10 for work and fun, and then came home for crypto and family. So I was happy to attend the conference for the first time. It was cool to meet a bunch of people in person who I've been friends with online for many years. I did a lot of great networking. I was, hoping to find a little bit more variety, but at the same time, I know Bitcoin Magazine has to cater to Bitcoin maximalists, so they don't want too much, Ethereum-ready businesses hanging around. So it was quite interesting, and there was a lot to do and to network with. And I'm not much of a swag guy. I tend to leave those kinds of things behind. But I did have a bunch of really great and interesting conversations, walking around educating people about my platform while being respectful that I was not a vendor at the conference. So it was really, really excellent. And I'm looking forward to more events this year, like Permissionless coming up soon in Palm Beach. And of course, my colleague Aaron was just at Paris Blockchain Week. So there's going to be an increasing presence for us as we push out to the community and talk about what we're doing.
All right, and back to the hot take round. Sheldon, the next question is, what would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
You can't stop this. That's the number one thing. There is no technology within reason that can meet a cost basis that makes sense for any government. Even if you're talking about all the world superpowers getting together, they would have to liquidate their reserves. They would have to liquidate bonds. They would have to drop, I think I estimated once it would be about $3.2 trillion to try to mitigate evasive cryptocurrency protocols over the wider internet. So I don't see that happening. I saw that there was a period in 2018 where the Bitcoin mining pools were not centralized, but a significant portion of them were sort of based in China. Now that China has had a little bit more of a shakeout with its back and forth for bans and approvals, that's not really an option anymore. So I don't think that the US has that power now because a lot of mining has moved to the US. But I think that there is effectively not an opportunity for crypto to go dead. We're past the point of no return.
I love it. All right, you're a network engineer, Sheldon, so you'll very much relate to an old saying from Mr. Bill Gates, actually, who said that we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. So cast your mind forward. Feel free to speculate. Blockchain, Web3, whatever you want to call it. What does it look like in 10 years' time?
So I think in 10 years' time, you start getting a little bit more of a cultural rift. I don't want to say like iPhone versus Android, but that's not a two different mindset to consider. So iPhone is really designed for user experience, for comfort, for sort of ease of use. Android is much more designed for flexibility with the technology, customizability. You can flash your own ROMs, you can do little hacky fun things. So I think we'll be looking at a culture more like that relative to crypto in the future, where 5 years, 6 years down the line, someone will say, "Oh yeah, I've got a little Bitcoin in my IRA just in case things go belly up." That'll be very normal as a iPhone grade. I'm comfortable with this. This is easy kind of finance. But at the same time, there's going to be a lot more people like me who want to have direct control over their finances because they've totally lost trust for things like central governments, banks, even their employer.
Makes sense to me. All right. Sheldon, I guess the flip side of that, of course, is another familiar saying, this time from William Gibson, who said that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So, with that in mind, can you think of an example of the future being here right now, but most people just aren't really aware of it?
I mean, I could call Near Protocol that future. I am a very significant believer in Near Protocol purely on merits, not on social value or anything except the technology itself. The prioritization of user experience, yeah, that's great, but that's more of a front end thing, and I'm kind of a back end guy. So the way that Near Protocol makes things easy for users, but has a technology roadmap that will make sense for thousands of transactions per second over different servers and still maintaining a nice behavior, a sort of reliable experience instead of a $50 Bitcoin transaction. That's the future that I'm more interested in. I think that this principle is coming the way that I see the Internet of Money, where you should effectively have a color wheel that requires almost no understanding. Hey, I want to spend this asset today. Hey, this vendor likes Stellar. Hey, this vendor likes Litecoin. Hey, this vendor likes Bitcoin. It should not ultimately make a difference. If there is such things as multi-chain dexes, which do exist today, but don't work very efficiently, then there's no reason why over time a point of sale system could say, how would you like to pay today? And it wouldn't just be cash or check.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Okay, we're starting to, as we get closer to finishing off, time to zoom out, time to get a little bit weird for just a second, Sheldon. What do you see as the long-term future for the human race? Do you see dystopia or utopia?
Ooh, this is a fun one. Okay, so you could argue that utopia for the few and dystopia for the many is like the overt future that we're charging towards. I don't think that's necessarily wrong. I think that a lot of people in crypto are settled on a sort of new Bretton Woods moment, as some sort of black swan event, giant economic reset, or something like that. But I think there's a very significant amount of sort of super band-aids, hidden solutions in place, things that are designed to keep the existing status quo moving along as is. So I think what that's going to translate to is that dystopia won't be necessarily the thing that majority of people experience, but it will be the projection that the majority of businesses want to put forward. So when I, as a person who holds cryptocurrency, get to behave in a sovereign manner and not be able to be controlled by a banking structure and spend most of my life working in digital assets, it's much harder for me to be sort of taken against as a point of cultural leverage. What I mean by that is that it's easy for the public to say, hey, these are the WikiLeaks guys. Hey, these are the terrorists. These are the bad guys. You shouldn't trust them. But simultaneously, there's nothing that I would actually be doing that makes me that. So this like sort of gap between the utopia for the few and dystopia for the some, who's going to live in between there? People who are interested in digital assets and who want to completely disconnect from government or centralized organizations to the best of their ability, meaning that anyone who kind of falls into that gap is looking at a future where you acknowledge both the dystopia and the utopia and say, okay, I know both of these things are based on power and money, and I might not be able to achieve the utopia, but I certainly don't want the dystopia. So let me see if I can balance this out with some sovereign control of my own assets.
I love it. All right, let's start to close this out. Sheldon, finally, what is your favorite science fiction, a book, a film, TV show, or universe?
Oh, I like a lot of them. Difficult question. Let's see. Um, well, let me say this. I will. I'll give you a sort of direction. Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury are the two science fiction artists, if not Kurt Vonnegut, who I really sort of bound my philosophies to. And I think the way that they perceive this dystopian model is that it will truly take over everyone. But it's also part of what gave me the hope to say it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to go down this Black Mirror grade nonsense and end up with everyone, pedaling on bicycles to generate electricity for the own LED walls that we have in front of us. So I'm pretty fond of a couple of different Isaac Asimov stories. I guess if I have to absolutely pick one, it's probably I, Robot, not necessarily the movie that most people are familiar with, but the sort of individual stories about robots having personality, about the future being a little bit more than just soulless computers. And of course, there's always the ghosts in the machine talk. There's the how do segments of RAM inexplicably behave in patterns that weren't programmed, things like that. So there's lots of different sort of things to explore there, but at a base level, I think what we're looking at is a sort of compromise based on those futures, but only because people saw them coming. Like the same way that 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea made more sense to what a submarine is today. An environment like Ray Bradbury's future or Isaac Asimov's future, we kind of understand that dystopia already. That means we probably don't want that.
Again, I love it, Sheldon. Thank you for that. And I don't know, I'm watching a show at the moment. It's called Raised by Wolves. Are you
Hmm.
aware of that?
I live under a rock. I'm not familiar at all. Tell me.
It's just it's a fantastic show. It's sci-fi. It's about two AIs in the future that have been sent to a distant exoplanet with six human embryos to start a new civilization, and that's kind of the starting point. But it is absolutely bonkers. Just one of the more out there TV series I've ever watched, and but it's actually and it's directed. The first two episodes certainly are directed by Ridley Scott, so that'll give you a bit of an idea of its pedigree as well. But really recommend that to anyone listening. Here at the end of the show, Raised by Wolves. Yeah, superb. Of course, Isaac Asimov as well, one of the classic sci-fi authors. Sheldon, it's been excellent to speak with you today. Have very much enjoyed our conversation. Nothing else to say really except to hand the metaphorical microphone back to yourself. Please tell the people where they can find you on Twitter or wherever else you like to hang out, and what they should do, where they should go to learn more about you and the team and Octopus.
Thanks so much, Andy. It has been a pleasure talking with you today. And if you want to come find out more, OCT.network is our website. If you look up OCT_network on Twitter, you'll find both the Telegram, which is a little more casual, and the Discord, which is a little bit more business. And I help with weird technical questions in both. So please, if you read about our project, if you learn about what we're working on at Octopus Network, and you want to play some chaos theory with me, please come do that. I love the, hey, can it break like this? Hey, how does this work? I'm very happy to be stumped because that means I have more learning to do. So I haven't gotten a good stump to chump moment in a little while. So that's what I would say to those technical minds listening. Come chat me up, come see what you'd like to poke and prod about, and I'm more than happy to answer questions and talk about the great work we're doing at Octopus.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Sheldon. All the best, and bye for now.
Cheers.